All right, buckle up, because we're going deep on the Panasonic Lumix GX85 today.
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
You know I love a good deep dive, and this time we're looking at a pro photographer's review on lens clear.
Yeah.
So we'll break down what makes this camera tick and see if it might be the one for you.
You know, what's interesting is this GX85, it's not exactly a brand new camera.
Right.
But this photographer, they make a really strong case for why it might still be the perfect pick, especially for certain types of photography.
That's what caught my eye, too. It's all about finding those hidden gems.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's start with the basics. 16 MP micro four thirds sensor, 49 area DFD autofocus, 5-axis in-body stabilization, 4K video,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that in a pretty compact package. Plus, the review mentioned the interface is easy to use, which is always a plus.
For sure. User-friendliness is key.
What are your thoughts on those specs? What jumps out at you?
Well, I think it's a really solid set of specs for any photographer, especially someone maybe starting out or looking for a second camera body. That 16MP sensor is going to give you crisp images, plenty of detail for prints and online sharing.
Also,
And that 49 area autofocus, that's designed to be super fast and accurate. You're going to capture the split-second moments like a bird in flight or a kid laughing.
absolutely. Those are the moments you don't want to miss. And speaking of not missing moments, let's talk about that 5-axis stabilization.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be huge, especially in low light or when you're shooting video handheld.
Absolutely. Helps smooth things out.
Say you're trying to get a shot of like a cityscape at night, or maybe you're filming a video blog and don't want shaky footage.
Right, exactly.
That stabilization is going to make a world of difference.
For sure. Gives you that extra bit of confidence, too.
Definitely. Now, one thing that stood out in the review was how versatile the GX85 is.
Yeah, the micro four thirds lens system, that's a big part of it.
They recommended starting with the 12-32mm kit lens, which seems like a great all-arounder.
Yeah, a nice compact zoom lens gives you that flexibility to capture different types of shots, landscapes, portraits, you name it.
But then, as you develop your skills, you can explore the whole world of other lenses.
Exactly, that's the beauty of it. Maybe you'll get into portrait photography and want a prime lens for that beautiful background blur. Or maybe you'll dive into macro and need a specialized lens for those tiny details.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for photographers. I love that.
For sure.
Now, this photographer, they shared some awesome stories of using the GX85 in all sorts of situations.
Oh, yeah.
Talked about shooting mountain vistas, street scenes, even behind-the-scenes video footage.
Wow, a true all-rounder then.
Right. It really showcases how adaptable this camera is.
That's what I'm hearing, yeah. It can handle pretty much anything you throw at it.
And this is where things get really interesting. Apparently, the GX85 has a super quiet shutter,
Ooh, okay. I like that.
which can be a major advantage in certain situations. What comes to mind for you?
Well, right away I'm thinking weddings, concerts, wildlife photography, any scenario where you don't want to be disruptive.
Yeah. Or street photography. Blending in and capturing those candid moments.
Exactly. That quiet shutter can make all the difference.
Okay, but here's the big question. In 2025, with tech moving so fast,
Yeah.
is a camera like the GX85, which isn't brand spanking new, is it still relevant?
That's the question, isn't it? But what this photographer is saying, and I tend to agree, is that the GX85 still holds its own, especially for the price.
I see what you mean.
Newer cameras, sure, they might have a few more bells and whistles, maybe a faster processor, a couple more autofocus points.
Right.
But those upgrades often come with a hefty price tag.
True, and sometimes those upgrades are incremental, not leaps and bounds.
Exactly. So you have to ask yourself, do you really need the absolute latest and greatest? Or is there value in a camera that's proven itself, that delivers fantastic quality at a more accessible price point?
I think that's a really important point. It's about being a smart consumer, understanding what you need and what you're willing to invest in.
Absolutely. And the GX85, it might not be the newest kid on the block, but it's got a lot to offer.
All right, so it seems like the GX85 might be a hidden gem for certain photographers.
It could be, yeah.
And this photographer, they shared some great advice on how to really get the most out of it.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
But we'll dive into those tips in part 2 of our deep dive, so stay tuned for that.
So before we jump to the break, we were talking about, is a camera like the GX85 still worth it in 2025?
Yeah, and it sounds like this photographer thinks so.
Oh, they definitely do. In fact, they even said they sometimes prefer it over some newer cameras they've tried.
Really?
Yep, they called it their workhorse. Reliable, capable of producing great images even today.
Makes you think twice about always chasing the latest model, huh?
It really does, and they're not alone in this, you know? This photographer mentioned that there's like a whole community online, other photographers who swear by the GX85.
So it's got a loyal following. It says something.
Right, like maybe the best camera is the one that you really connect with, the one that just works for you.
That makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, so let's get into some of the advice this photographer shared about how to get the most out of the GX85.
Right.
They talked a lot about mastering metering techniques.
Oh yeah, metering, that's huge.
Can you break that down for us? Why is that so important?
So metering, it's basically understanding how your camera sees light, how it measures it.
Mhm.
And it's important because it helps you get the right exposure, you know, making sure your photos aren't too bright or too dark, and it gives you more creative control.
So, like, instead of just letting the camera decide everything,
Right.
you can actually use your knowledge of light to shape the look of your photos.
Exactly, you're making conscious decisions. And this photographer, they're all about getting it right in camera
Okay.
rather than relying on tons of editing afterwards.
So it's about being intentional from the start.
Exactly. And the GX85, it has a bunch of different metering modes.
Okay.
So this photographer recommends, playing around with those, taking some test shots, really figuring out how they work.
Gotcha. So you can adapt to different lighting situations.
Right. Like maybe you're shooting a portrait on a sunny day, you'd use a different metering mode than if you were, say, shooting a landscape at sunset.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
And then once you've got a handle on metering, you can start customizing other camera settings, right?
Yes. This photographer loves to tweak and customize. They suggest setting up different profiles for various shooting scenarios.
What do you mean by profiles?
So think of it like creating your own preset modes. Like say you have a profile for street photography.
Sure.
You could set it up with a fast shutter speed to freeze motion, a wider aperture for that blurry background, and maybe even black and white mode.
Oh, I like that.
Then you could switch to a portrait profile with a narrower aperture, to really focus on your subject and so on.
So it's kind of like having different versions of the camera optimized for different situations.
Exactly. And it helps you work more efficiently because you're not fiddling with all the settings every time you change scenes.
That's super handy.
Right. It's like just grab and go, focus on capturing the moment.
Now, there's one more tip that I think is especially important for anyone who wants to get serious about photography.
What's that?
Shooting in RAW format.
Ah, yes. RAW. This photographer is a huge fan.
Can you explain why RAW is such a big deal?
Sure. So with JPEGs, your camera basically processes the image and throws away some data.
Oh, okay.
But with RAW, you're capturing all that data from the sensor.
I see. So it gives you more to work with later.
Exactly. It gives you much more flexibility in editing. You can adjust things like exposure, white balance, shadows, highlights, all without losing image quality.
So you have more control over the final look.
Precisely. This photographer's point is that it's not about, creating fake images or anything like that.
Right.
It's about having the tools to really refine your photos and bring out the best in them.
Gotcha. So it's like having a digital negative that you can develop and print in different ways.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered metering, custom settings, RAW format. What about lenses? The photographer seemed pretty passionate about those.
Oh, yeah. They're all about exploring different lenses. They're especially big fans of prime lenses.
Prime lenses. Those are the ones with a fixed focal length, right?
Yep. No zooming in and out.
So what's the appeal?
Well, they often have wider apertures, which means they can let in more light.
Okay.
And that allows you to create those really beautiful, shallow depth of field shots where the background is all blurry.
All right, I love that look.
And prime lenses tend to be sharper and have better image quality overall compared to zoom lenses.
Interesting. So it's a trade-off, less flexibility, but better quality.
Yeah, and it forces you to think more about your composition, move around, find the right angle.
Makes you work for it a little bit more.
Exactly, but in a good way.
Now, the GX85 has that smaller micro four thirds body, right? Did the photographer have any tips about shooting with a smaller camera?
Well, they said that even though the GX85 has great image stabilization, it's still important to be mindful of camera shake, especially in low light.
Right, that makes sense.
So they recommend using a tripod whenever you can.
Good advice.
But if that's not possible, they said you can try bracing the camera against something solid, like a wall or a railing, anything to keep it steady.
So being resourceful, I like it.
And of course, just taking your time, making sure you have a good grip, all those basic photography techniques.
It's easy to forget about those sometimes when you get caught up in the moment.
It happens to the best of us.
So we've covered a lot of tips here.
We have.
But there's one question I think is on everyone's mind.
What's that?
Who exactly is this camera, the GX85? Who is it perfect for?
Who is the GX85 perfect for? Well, this photographer started by saying it's a great choice for anyone who needs a solid second camera body,
Okay.
especially if they're already using micro four thirds lenses.
So you've already got some glass, you just need another body,
Exactly, something compact, something capable.
like a backup that's always ready to go.
Exactly. They also highlighted the price.
Yeah, the GX85 is known for being pretty affordable.
Right, so it's a good option for photographers who, maybe don't have a ton of money to spend, but still want a quality camera.
Students, hobbyists, people just starting out.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. Now, throughout this whole deep dive, we've been talking about how portable the GX85 is.
Yeah, it's a small camera.
Did the photographer touch on that at all?
Oh, they definitely did. They said
Yeah.
it's perfect for people who value convenience, who want to be able to take their camera everywhere.
The kind of photographer who never wants to miss a moment.
Exactly. They even mentioned that it's, worth considering for video, too.
Oh, yeah, the GX85 shoots 4K video, right?
That's right. And the photographer said the quality is excellent. And because the camera's so small, it's easy to use for things like vlogging or, documentary style shooting.
So it's a multi-talented little camera.
It really is. It's not just about the specs, though. It's about, finding a camera that inspires you, that fits your style.
That makes you want to get out there and shoot.
And I think this photographer made a really compelling case for why the GX85 could be that camera for a lot of people.
I think so, too. It's been a fascinating deep dive. I've learned a lot.
Me too.
So whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting your photography journey, hopefully this is giving you some things to think about.
And maybe even inspired you to try something new.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.